As we celebrate Black History Month, it's important to highlight the calls for social justice happening around the country. Last year, protests erupted after several African Americans were killed at the hands of police. Those protests happening in Charlotte as well. Tonight, CMPD Chief Johnny Jennings and Mecklenburg County Sheriff Garry McFadden share how they perceive the events of 2020 as both black men and law enforcement leaders. WCNC Charlotte's Alex Shabbat joins us now with that story.
Well, both the police chief and the sheriff shared their own personal experiences with police as African-American men, which weren't always positive, and they're embracing the calls for change.
This is what democracy looks like.
As protests broke out across the country over black people being killed at the hands of police.
It wasn't particularly just about George Floyd.
Here in Charlotte,
we are pushed down and walked on a lot.
The events were not only seen through the eyes of the law,
That was just the breaking point for our society,
but also with perspective from two top African-American leaders tasked with enforcing it.
Do you think you see things differently given that you're African-American?
Absolutely, I see things differently.
I hope that was allowed me to be able to see each side of it and to understand a little bit more.
I marched with a mask that says 846. I don't think that anybody who is not of color could have walked with that mask except me.
Neither the sheriff nor the chief had a calling for law enforcement early on in life.
When I was younger, I wasn't interested in law enforcement.
I really didn't want to get into law enforcement when I was younger.
In fact, Sheriff McFadden says he had a bad experience with police in high school when he and his friends were stopped for walking in a rural road after football practice.
Do you believe you were racially profiled?
Absolutely. Although we weren't handcuffed, we were standing on the side of the road and he was just going on and on and on about what we should do.
And more recently, Chief Jennings says he was pulled over for no apparent reason in his wife's luxury car while driving out of state just a couple years ago.
The first thing I thought of when I left, I said, wait a minute, was I just profiled here? Was I racially profiled?
With the racial reckoning of 2020 came questions about the root causes of the problem. Specifically, is it systemic racism in police departments or just a few bad apples?
I've seen systemic racism.
I think the issue is much bigger than just a few bad apples.
But Chief Jennings says the good officers don't always get the attention they deserve. And based on the results of a department survey, he says CMPD officers are listening to the calls for changes to policing, which he thought would meet some resistance.
Now, I was shocked, but what I got back from our officers was that they embraced it. They were ready for it. They knew that it was time.
However, the chief says perception is reality, which means they still have to work to change people's views of police. And they'll need help from the African-American community to do that.
We have to be in it together and do it together.
After I finally take this badge and gun off, and who knows when that'll be, I'm still a black man, and my community is still either going to accept me or not accept me. And
Sheriff McFadden says one change he'd like to see in policing is for officers to be trained to intervene when another officer is using excessive force. In Charlotte, Alex Shabbat, WCNC Charlotte.